Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Fite Sports Uncovered. Another fantastic episode lined up for you guys again this weekend. Geez, so much to talk about. I think the big news, obviously, locally, is the fact that combat sports gyms are now open. They can get back to training. Whether or not there's going to be too many matches, too many bouts taking place, too many tournaments, that remains to be seen. And talking to some of those that are in the know, top of the federations, they're talking about maybe 2 to 3 months before that even takes place. But globally, some massive news coming out. And I think the biggest news of all of that is, once again, very much COVID related. UFC 251, the very first event of Fight Island, scheduled for this weekend, has had a COVID casualty. Yep, we've got Burns, unfortunately, testing positive. He's out of that title fight. We've got a late notice replacement. Jorge Masvidal stepped in to take on Kamaru Usman for that welterweight title. It's going to be a massive one because it's not just one title fight. We have got a triple header. Yep, a triple header coming up because we have got the big one taking place next. That's the rematch, Volkanovski versus Holloway. And then we've got Yan versus Aldo. That's for the bantamweight title. Also taking place this weekend, KSW 53. The Polish guys are back for their first event in a number of months. And then looking forward to next week, Tuesday, we've got a big boxing fight coming up. Jamal Herring, he's up against Jonathan Oquendo. And that could be a big one because Jamal Herring been making waves up until the whole epidemic kicked in. And hopefully going to see him continue on that great wave of form that he's been showcasing prior to the pandemic. But that's all about the punchy kicky action taking place this weekend. Let's talk about today's guest and today's show. If I look at my guest's CV, it's probably going to take about the rest of the show to go through it in detail. So I'm going to give you a couple of his big headlines out of his CV. Boxing is in this man's blood from a very, very young age of 12 years old. He was the youngest ever licensee of Boxing South Africa in the country. He's a gym owner, he's a trainer, he's a manager, he is a boxing TV pundit. He is also the head of MTK Africa, the head office of the MTK franchise here in Africa. None other than Colin Nathan. Welcome to the show.
Yes, I wish my wife spoke about me so highly. Thanks for having me. Let's do the shake first.
Yeah, let's do that. Oh, very well, a long time.
Yeah, it has been a while. I enjoy speaking to you, Mark.
Chatted to you radio years and years ago.
Yeah.
First time we've had a chance to chat on TV.
Yeah, I did my makeup.
I can see you also cut your hair. You've obviously been to the hairdressers.
Has to look good. You never know who's going to watch, so.
Absolutely. Looking at the CV.
Yeah.
Let's start off 12 years old. Youngest ever licensee.
So actually I was younger. So there's a story behind that. So I started going to shows at the age of 6 or 7, and I started tagging into the corner when I was 10.
Yeah.
And legally, I was doing it illegally. And then the late Marcus Temple of the Western Cape Boxing Commission at the time went to my father. He had enough about chasing me out the corner. And he said, look, the act says, and it was the old act before 2003, that there was no age limit. So he said to my late father, why don't you just get Colin licensed and there won't be this issue. So I got licensed in 1990 at the age of 12, and I became the youngest cornerman in South African boxing history. And so my history actually started when I was about 6, taken to boxing gym at 7, and my first boxing show was in 1985 actually. And I still remember the main event. It was Sandile Hoho and Philip Mpara, and Philip Mpara beat the defending champion Sandile Hoho, who unfortunately is in prison right now. But there's a long line of history between the Ho-Hos and my late dad, so that was kind of my first introduction to boxing.
So definitely in your blood, 12 years old. For the viewers out there, what were you doing when you were 12? He was cornering top-end boxers at promotions around the country. So, I mean, definitely we can say boxing been in the blood from a very, very young age.
It's kind of like all I want to do with my life right now.
All you've ever done, almost.
Yeah, pretty much. Except, get married, have kids, and, live the dream.
The obvious things that we also do.
Yeah.
Carrying on looking at this, your gym, Hotbox, Glen Hazel, list of champions that comes out of that gym. I mean, 2 of them ring sort of big names. We're talking Heki Butler, we're talking Maruti Mtalani. There's a host of others. I'm sure the wall is It's a pity we couldn't be in the gym. We could showcase the wall, but we definitely will be there soon.
Yes. So the gym, unfortunately, is on lockdown. We've changed location to Savoy Estates.
Okay.
It's now called Hotbox MTK Africa Gym, obviously because of my getting involved with MTK Global. And the success is, the only time I actually really kind of take a look at my career is when I do these kind of interviews. When you start talking about the champions, and I'm like, yeah, I've actually done that, so that's pretty cool. I don't sit and I'm always sitting behind my laptop or in the gym thinking about the next champion I want to groom and make, and that's where I get my passion and my drive, because I'm one of those guys who can just never be, it's not that I'm never satisfied, okay, so what's next? It's like that guy who gets the BMW, who wants the Ferrari, who wants the Lamborghini, so there's always levels to I want to achieve, so I can never sit back. I'll sit back after we win the World Championship and maybe go out for an ice cream because I don't drink. And then, a week later, I'm back in the gym thinking, okay, cool, what's next? Let's go,
Talking about what's next, very few trainers, coaches in this country can talk about this next accolade.
Correct.
You've spent a bit of time training under and learning Freddie Roach.
Yeah, so Freddie...
what an experience.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Freddie's a friend of mine. I've done a few camps with him. Been very fortunate to actually stay in his apartment the 1 year and then be witness to a Manny Pacquiao training camp, which was amazing. And Freddie's just one of the all-time greats. His trainer was Eddie Futch, one of the last, line of boxing teachers, along in the same mold as, Angelo Dundee and, Ray Arsell, you could say. But Freddie's just a phenomenal coach and just a really good human being too.
Also, 2019, I'm not too sure, maybe we're going to embarrass you right about now. 2019 Sunday Times, they nominated you as Trainer of the Decade.
Yeah, I was actually on holiday. I just came back from Japan, and so I just came back from Japan. Maruti had successfully defended his championship against Akira Higashi. And I was actually out for lunch with my family, and I was going through the paper. And I turned over to the Sunday Times, to the sports section, and I was like, Trainers of the Decade. And I was like, Laura's my wife's now. I was like, Laura's, is that my now? I was like, what? Yeah. I was really stunned. So yeah, it's just, it's a combination of just really hard work and knowing what I want. And I used to say I'm living in my dream, but now I've gone one step further. I'm actually living in my vision. So my vision is to give back to the sport and make champions. And with all of that comes all the success, because the fighter does well, inevitably, then the next step is they're going to look at the trainer, and I guess that would be me.
Adding to that, the success clearly has started. MTK Global knocked on your door.
Correct.
You are now officially the head of MTK Africa.
Correct.
A division of MTK Global.
Yes.
What does that mean? Very quickly, does that mean everything under the MTK Combat Sports banner sits with Colin Nathan?
So it's a good question. Firstly, let me just say, and I'm obviously going to give my company a punt, it's the biggest and largest boxing management company in the world in boxing, and probably the most successful. We've got great clients on our books, obviously, and our number one client has to be Tyson Fury, the linear and WBC heavyweight champion of the world. And obviously, I brought a lot of fighters from my stock of fighters onto the books for MTK Africa for Global. And it's just growing in leaps and bounds. So we've just recently signed an MMA fighter here in South Africa. His trainer reached out to me. The kid's still in KwaZulu-Natal at the moment due to the whole COVID situation. I'm looking forward to meeting him. I think he signed the agreement last week.
Yeah,
so it's very exciting.
I was notified last week, so I don't know when he signed.
So it's very exciting that obviously MMA is now coming to Africa with regards to MTK. And I'm just looking forward to I love the athletes. Inevitably, people around the sport, MMA and boxing, need to realize that if it wasn't for the athlete, we wouldn't have jobs. You and I wouldn't be sitting here. So one of my focus points in what I do has always been about the athletes. So it's just great that MMA and particularly boxing for MTK has obviously just now had a footprint. Now it's having a footprint in Africa.
And in terms of the vision, you spoke earlier about your personal vision, you living that personal vision. You obviously being the head of MTK here in Africa, you can obviously, I would assume, implement a personal vision as well as the global organization's vision in terms of taking MTK across the continent.
Absolutely. So my objective, and obviously it's been a little bit stagnated because of COVID, was to get young fighters onto our company books. So if you look at the structure for MTK Africa for boxing, we've got some world-class athletes and world champions on our books. But my vision was, and it started last year when I went to the All Africa Games in Rabat, Morocco, was to start identifying really red-hot talents under the age of 25 to get onto the company books. So that's what my focus is. And obviously when things loosen up and travel is allowed, particularly outside of South Africa, I will be procuring young fighters. And I've got a few fighters that have been in contact with me and that are keen to sign for the company. One we've already signed is Tariq Alali from Morocco. He won the gold medal of the middleweight division, the All Africa Games last year. It's interesting because we did the deal, his visa was approved, and literally the week that his visa was approved was the national lockdown. So obviously we're looking to regroup once the things are lifted, but there's a few others under the age of 25, because I believe the next 5 to 10 years, these fighters will be carrying the flag for not just South Africa, but for African boxing. And that's my vision. And obviously the head office is siding with my vision and understand my passion, why I want to grow the young fighters, because it's okay looking after the current stock of fighters, but inevitably they're going to get old and they're going to move on and retire. But you got to worry about the young crop coming through, and that's one of my focuses for this year.
Let's talk MTK, and I know I want to talk a little bit more about this later on in the show, but MTK is a business. It's a business about making money, managing and promoting top-end professional fighters, right? Where's the amateur set?
So that's a good question. That's a really good question. So let me just talk outside of South Africa. And, we can talk about Sanaba having its issues, and it's been well documented. There have been press releases and stories in various newspapers about what's been going on with Sanaba. But, when I get on a plane and I go to Senegal for the African Olympic qualifiers, I don't see the situation in the politics within the countries of the amateur systems. I see fighters. And inevitably, what you got to understand is that every fighter who's amateur wants to turn pro for two reasons: to become financially secure and to become champion of the world. So when it comes down to the politics of the amateur federations outside of South Africa, I can't really comment. The situation in South Africa is a very interesting point, because for years now, and I stand to be corrected, amateur trainers were not allowed to integrate with professional boxing gyms. And the problem that we've always had is that, well, if you're a pro trainer, you can't be coaching amateurs or you can't go to the corner. I was told a few years ago that rule's changed. I haven't seen anything of it. I have suggested over the years to Sanaba, the various people who were present in the organization, that listen, I'll come give workshops. I'll come give some of my time up and start working with these athletes. Come to my gym. I got 2 rings. Come to my gym. Let's. And I fell on deaf ears. And I wasn't expecting anything in return, just to give back and help the guys. So when it comes to grassroots, and it's a good question that you ask, I don't think enough is being done at the amateur system. So for me, my role is to look after the fighter in a professional capacity. Will I look after an amateur fighter? It's a good question. Well, I'm going to look after an amateur fighter if that amateur fighter is keen to embark on a professional career. That's when I come into it. But in terms of actual developing amateur boxing, it's something seriously that needs to be looked into. I do know that there's a new committee for Sanaba. I'm hoping that there will be a change, a positive change. The next question is, do we have talent? Well, that's my game. I mean, that's my game, right?
We're going to leave that one there. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to unpack all of that talent. Don't go away. We'll be right back after this.
Start up your day with faith-filled confessions of healing and health from the Healing School mobile app.
Therefore I declare that I enjoy the life of perfect health and perfect peace always.
Living a healthy, vibrant, and prosperous life depends on the words you speak. Download the Healing School mobile app today on the Google Play and Apple App Store, or visit our website at www.enterthehealingschool.org.
Welcome back to Fite Sports Uncovered. Me, your host, Mark Joubert. We're coming to you from the Storms Pot restaurant here in Ferndale, Randburg. And guys, if you've been watching the show the last couple of weeks, get down to your local restaurants, your local hangouts, the places you used to frequent. I mean, we've got to keep these businesses going. We've got to make sure that if you want that meal, you want to get out, take the family out, these restaurants are open. Get down there, support local. Let's make sure that these restaurants are still going to be there when all of this pandemic is over. Today's show, as always, proudly brought to you by Minati Chocolate. And we've been giving away hampers of Minati over the last couple of weeks, and today is no exception. So our question for you today to win a Minati hamper is very, very simple. My guest, Colin Nathan, mentioned that his gym had recently moved from Glen Hazel. If you can tell me exactly where his gym moved to, you could win a Minati hamper. Simply WhatsApp your answer to +27 83 885 2040, and we'll announce the winner next week's show, and you could be walking away with that delicious Minati hamper. All right, let's get back to today's show. And just before the break, my guest Colin Nathan was telling us about what is happening in MTK Global, what's happening in MTK Africa, and the whole issue around amateur fighters, then taking it further down to the fact that grassroots, because his comment just before we took a break was, do we have talent here in South Africa and on the African continent?
So I'm gonna, yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I wouldn't be sitting here if there wasn't talent. I mean, you know, if I didn't train the fighters that I do, I wouldn't be sitting in this interview. So, yes, we have the talent. Is it being developed and nurtured correctly? I think there needs to be more done. And, you know, like, with all due respect, when a fighter from the amateur circuit is ready to turn professional, the professional coach isn't prepared to stand in front of the mirror with that amateur fighter and teach that fighter how to throw a jab. The basis and the foundation must be started in the amateurs.
Correct.
And I don't think enough is being done in that department. Things always change, and things can change positively. And I think now with the new committee in Sonabo, and I think with the young talent coming through, I think there's always going to be standouts, but there's always going to be decent talent and those standouts coming through.
But what's the process? I mean, you mentioned when a fighter turns pro. I mean, what's the process? Is it the trainer? Is it the manager? Is there a process within Sonabo? Because if I look back at other combat sports, and let's use MMA as an example, in many instances, we've got young amateurs with hardly any fights on their record, very few fights on their record, not anything like many amateur boxers, and the vast majority of them are turning pro simply because they can't get fights as an amateur.
Okay, so I can't comment on MMA, but I can comment on boxing, and my criteria is very different to any other trainer you would speak to. I look at several issues. I look at how many fights has the kid had, has he done on that level, his age, his weight. You know, people, obviously I have people on the ground who tell me, no, this kid's good, this kid's not good, don't waste your time. When a kid's had 100 amateur fights and he's won 90, and he's been a national champion several times, you know the kid's got a decent, you know, he's got potential. You know, if the kid's got an Olympic bronze medal, you know, chances of the kid becoming a world champion are pretty good. So I look at those factors, and also look at, you know, I look at the kid's environment where he or she comes from. You know, can the kid fight? Does the kid have the right mental aptitude to be a fighter? And, you know, just because you're a great amateur doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be a great professional. But I look at it kind of holistically, and I'm very much on the whole energy thing. So if I gel nicely with a fighter, by and large, and they fit the criteria that I'm looking for, I will work with that fighter.
A couple of points. One, most youngsters getting into the sport of boxing in this country are getting into the sport to get out of poverty.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
So surely an aspect that I would think that you would look at is my ability, the kid's ability as you refer to it, the kid's ability to be able to handle the fame, the fortune that comes with potentially being a top-end pro.
Sometimes they just don't. Sometimes they just can't handle that.
We see it all
But
the time.
we see it all the time. But talking about those, you know, when I talk about environments, I mean, I like the hardened kid, you know. And let's be honest, boxing is one of those sports where, you know, kids fight for two reasons. Like I said, to be champion of the world, to make money, but inevitably sometimes there's financial difficulties in the household, abuse in the household, only one parent, financial constraints with, you know, there's not enough food in the kid's stomach when he goes to school. I've seen it before, you know, or bullying. Listen, to be a fighter takes a special person, but there's got to be an edge to that person to want to get in the ring to fight. I look for that edge. Okay. And if the fighter doesn't have that edge, I'm not going to work with him or her.
The other point, and I want to ask, you use the word kid. Now, I know you don't use that flippantly. What is female boxing like in South Africa? Globally, it
seems to be growing.
It's
correct.
On the rise,
Yeah.
Locally, I see it.
So there's not enough participants. That's the first problem. But not enough's being done again. You know, and I'm not going to, you know, finger point at Boxing South Africa or, you know, the promoters. I mean, I think collectively we should all stand up and say, you know what, for every boxing tournament there should be a female fight. That's what the mandate was a few years ago, and I think that mandate should be implemented again. There are some really good female fighters. I've got a South African junior welterweight champion, Head of MTK, who's 5-0. She's really good. I mean, she beats up some of the guys in my gym, and she's really, really talented. I think she's potentially world class. So not enough's being done, but you know, like I said, I'm not going to finger point and say it's this person's fault, it's that person's fault. I think we're all to blame, and I think all of us collectively should stand up and do something about it.
Final point before we get to the crux of where I want to get to in this discussion. Your gym has had some great success. You've got world champions. There are many gyms around this country. And I just look at I mean, there are training names in this country that are literally Hall of Famer stuff, okay? But if I look at the champions that are coming out of those gyms, I very rarely see Olympic medalists coming out of those gyms.
It's a good question. It's a really good question.
What's happening there? Because for me, I think, I look at you and I go, great, Colin Nathan has got world champions, but does he have an Olympic gold medalist? Does he have an Olympic silver medalist that he has ever groomed to that level and then gone on to world championships?
So it's a really good question. I'm going to go back to that whole policy of amateur trainers and professional trainers are not allowed to be, mixing. So I can't, from what I understand, train amateur fighters. I'm not legally allowed to. My understanding is. I heard years ago that that's all changed or was going to change. I haven't seen anything of that. So I know in America and various other countries that the crossover is allowed to happen. But for professional boxing, I believe that we're not allowed to do that. Would I like to train an Olympic gold medalist? Geez, I'd love to. We haven't had an Olympic medal winner in years in this country. And again, I'm going to go back to...
Could we say decades? I mean, it
has been decades. Yeah. I'm just trying to think when the last... Was it the 50? I can't even... I'm going to lie if I tell you. But the point is that could we? Of course we could. Anything's possible. But more needs to be done at grassroots levels. You know, like, even right now, I don't even know who the national coach of Sonabe is. I don't know. Do you know?
No idea.
So that tells you, you know. Back in the day, I could tell you, you know, Dingo Makasela was one of the greatest amateur coaches. There's Nicky Nessen-Boysens, who's, you know, one of the greatest amateur coaches as well. So we've got great trainers on the amateur level. But I just don't think enough is being put in. And it doesn't necessarily mean funding. It means just putting the time and appointing the right trainers and team managers to Sonabe and to these various clubs and giving them access to high performance centers. And maybe they did, or maybe they do. But I still think more needs to be done. If you look at some of the European countries, I mean, their amateur teams are financed by governments. I'm not suggesting that, you know, government needs to start plowing money into amateurs, but they need to start looking into that. And you want a gold medalist, you know, you got to start grooming that person from a young age.
Right. Let's talk about the fact that we now know combat sports, contact sports is now legal. Can we call it that? You can get back to training. We see MASA announcing that contact sports is back in. There are a whole bunch of loopholes. There are a whole bunch of sort of things that we have to jump through, do this, do that before you can get your certificates, before coaches can actually start training.
I was wondering why you were reaching out to me, Mark. No, I kind of figured. No, I'm kidding. So let's
talk boxing.
Yeah, so let's talk boxing. So obviously I saw the documents. And one of the clauses is through your organization. Well, our organization's Boxing South Africa, which doesn't fall under MASA, right? Yeah. But Boxing South Africa have gone around the country to inspect various gyms, and they came to inspect mine. There was a waiver that I needed to sign in order for me to open, which I refused to. I don't think we have enough time to get into the details of it, but basically there's a big risk involved in it, and I wasn't prepared to take that risk. Having said that, even if I said yes, and I am compliant, and I would have complied with regards to screening and COVID testing and the names of who's going to be in my facility, etc. Boxing South Africa, my understanding is that they still need to issue a certificate of eligibility, also some sort of documentation allowing that facility to open during this time. Here's the issue that I have. I'm not in my gym 24/7. I have other trainers in my facility, which means I'm not going to be able to police who comes in and out on my facility all the time. That in itself is a risk. The second thing is, I understand that there's no sparring and no mitt work allowed. The basis of my coaching when I coach is mitt work. Yeah. And what's the point of opening up my facility and allowing a person to hit a bag when he or she has got a punch bag where they're living at the moment, or they can shut? What's the point of me doing it right now? The other factor to consider as well, when are fights being scheduled?
So we don't know.
Well, there's been speculation, and there have been certain promoters who wanted to put out dates and now been postponed because we see the spike in South Africa, particularly in Johannesburg. So what's the point of opening the facility, potentially fighters contracting the virus, training and spreading the virus within my facility, and we still don't have any clarity on when the first tournaments are going to be allowed and sanctioned through Boxing South Africa with the promoters? So I just felt at this stage, with a spike, I wanted to eliminate that risk of infection, particularly with my fighters, and that's why I've decided to keep my gym closed for now.
That's sad news. Obviously, I mean, you've got some serious talent that are looking to get on fights. You had fights that were scheduled that have now been pushed back to sort of the last quarter of the year. Absolute craziness abounding. In terms of, we're almost run out of time. So final question for you. Your advice, young boxers, right now, in this time, what would your advice to be?
So I've been in touch with my young fighters. Yes. So they're still young. Yes. So, initially it was a great time for all of us to spend, with our families and stuff. I think that's kind of worn off. I think our kids and wives want us to get out the house and obviously start working. My message, it's not so much advice. My message is everything in life changes. This is not going to stay the same forever. Yes, we're going through a terrible spike now, and I think it's like 10,000 cases a day in Gauteng alone. But this too shall pass, and the young fighters still have their whole careers ahead of them. They need to stay positive and keep doing the road work. Don't get. I've seen pictures of some of the guys. They put on a lot of pounds because they're indoors eating, and But this is going to pass, and I still think before we go, that obviously people have lost their jobs and there have been pay cuts here and there, and I think boxing financially might take a bit of time to regroup and kind of normalize. And I use the word normalize very loosely, but I think there's going to be major opportunity. And I think those opportunities, the young fighters who are watching this, need to take advantage of that, because those opportunities will lead to other opportunities. And then when everything stabilizes and normalizes, the money will be there for the young fighters to achieve and obviously obtain when they fight.
Well, there you have it. Stay on the path is what I understand the message to be from my guest, Colin Nathan, today. Well, that's all the time we've had, and as you can see, we could talk about so many things. Half an hour is not enough. We're going to have to get him back. We're going to have to talk a little bit more detail once we get a better sort of line of sight in terms of what's happening for the gyms and how they're going to open and what these protocols are going to mean for young athletes, trainers, as well as fighters. Thanks for watching the show. Thanks to the guys and girls here at Storm's Pot. Thanks for hosting us here. Get out, support local. Come on, guys. These guys still want to be around when all of this madness is over. Until next week, protect yourselves at all times. We're out.